in the end of the day, when we don't have to fight the volume in terms of level,
Yep.
but we can still use volume as a tool to get to certain aesthetics if needed.
Mm-hmm.
If needed, yeah, I say, then at least when it's sitting out there with other things that came out, then it's not who's louder is winning the competition. It's what do you connect the most to.
Welcome to the Production Masters Podcast, the philosophies and techniques behind making music according to the masters of music production. Hi everybody, welcome back to the Production Masters Podcast. I'm Owen Gillett from Ice Cocoon and productionmasters.net. In this episode, I'm speaking to mastering engineer Maor Appelbaum. I imagine a fair few of you may already know who Maor is, but in case you don't, you'll hear everything you need to know in this podcast. He's certainly a very dedicated character, as you'll hear, and he's had a really interesting career. He has a beautiful studio. A summary of all the points we discussed in the interview will be in the show notes at productionmasters.net and also in the video descriptions on YouTube, where the videos are split into part A and B. So to keep things moving along, as always, you can subscribe to the podcast at YouTube, iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and you can also find it at Castbox. And the main site, of course, productionmasters.net. So let's rip into this one, my interview with Maor Appelbaum. All right, everybody, welcome back to another Production Masters podcast. And this morning, my very special guest is Mr. Maor Appelbaum. How do you do this morning, sir?
It's a great day. Good morning from Los Angeles. I'm excited to do this interview. I read the questions, and I think they're really good. So it's a great start for the morning. And
yep.
Let's rock.
Awesome, man. Yeah, it's an early morning here, but I'm fresh and ready to go, so let's do it. So for anyone that doesn't know who you are yet, can you tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do, what your job is? I mean, we can see you're a mastering engineer and you have an amazing setup and all that, but if you can give us just a little bit of background on what you do.
Well, my name is Maor Appelbaum. I'm a mastering engineer located in Los Angeles. I run a mastering studio called Maor Appelbaum Mastering, which caters bands from all over the world and all the different styles of music. I like to work with different types of gear, from analog to digital, hardware, software, combination, tube, solid state, whatever. You know, if it sounds right and it sounds good, then I work with it. I got to be here in LA for about close to 11 years. I'm here, and close to 11 years. And I'm really happy because it's a good place for me to work in.
When did you? Yes. Sorry, when did you get in your studio that you're in now? How long has it been that studio for? Because you did work with a couple of pretty big producers leading up to your own mastering business, didn't you?
Yeah, well, I came to America close to 11 years ago, and and then I worked for producer Sylvia Massey.
Yeah.
And up in Weed, California, she had a studio there called Radio Star Studios.
Yep.
And I worked for them.
And what were you doing with her?
What'd you say?
Oh, what was your job? What were you mostly doing working with her?
Well, I came there to do mastering, but we were kind of a big staff that lived either there or in the surrounding areas. So I actually did other stuff as well. Mastering was what I wanted to do and did a lot. But I also helped there with some engineering when there was a need for another engineer, you know, for tracking or for mixing if somebody, you know, was needed in the other room to mix a certain song while the other room was busy doing the other songs. And sometimes kind of assisting work, you know, help the staff, and a bit of tech work, but not deep tech, but more just like, you know, get the get the stuff from different places and exchange parts if needed.
And
not really, but the easier things. So basically, I was kind of all around.
Yep.
I did some recording for her. I did some mixing for her. I did some mastering, assisting. Part of the staff. I was the only one who does mastering, and I did some mastering there. But we were a whole staff, and it was a good experience. You learn a lot. You absorb all from how the bands work there, and
for sure,
it was definitely a very interesting and inspiring and a good experience. That helped me later on move forward. Also, I met a lot of people there, so there's people that I'm still friends with from back then. So some of the artists, and I worked with them later on too.
Right. That makes sense.
And then I moved to LA, and then I had a few different studios before I did this one. This was probably the best one I've had because I had the most options to work it in terms of redesigning it, changing things in time, tweaking it. So this is probably the best setup and studio that I have.
Awesome.
I've been in this one for about I would say probably more than 6 years.
Yep.
So it's definitely the best one, and also I always keep on improving it and tweaking it. Whatever I find that can do better, I add that into the equation.
For sure. So now I'm actually wondering, if we rewind just back a little bit further than that, how did you land the job working with Sylvia? And how did you make all that happen?
Well, it dates back to when I lived in Israel.
Right.
I'm Israeli native, and most of my life I lived there. And I was doing mastering there. And one of the bands that I knew for years went to record with Sylvia, a band called Seek Irony.
Yep.
And I knew them like when they just, really like started out. And so later on in their band career, they went to work with Sylvia. And when they came back, I mastered their songs. And then, I heard about the studio, and I reached out to Sylvia and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking of coming to America and trying to make the move. What do you think? Are you open to have me come there and work for you?" And she said yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I was 32 back then, and I said, let's go, let's do it. And I went there.
That's awesome. That's incredible. And did you have any training as a audio engineer from any schools or anything, or are you completely self-taught other than before the Sylvia phase?
No, I studied sound engineering. I've been in audio for quite a while, way before. And I've worked in studios in Israel, and I worked live sound and rehearsal rooms, and I was a broadcasting engineer for 8 years.
Wow.
And so I was doing audio way before I moved to America. And it was a combination of things that I did. I was DJing. I was a musician as well, so I recorded my own stuff and the bands I was part of. And I was doing live sound sometimes, a monitor engineer, not too much, but some of that. And I worked in rehearsal rooms and in studios. And then in broadcasting, I did that for a long time and consulted, and I even taught audio. So I was in audio for quite a long time. But when I was just before I turned 32, I decided to restart my career and make the big move. And then that's when I moved to America, and
Yeah.
went to work for Sylvia, and then after that, I came here. But in terms of mastering, I never studied mastering, or I was never mentored by anybody. I had to do it myself and learn by myself, and
Yes. So what is it about mastering that captured your desire to pursue it like with such determination and passion and all that? What was it about mastering?
Well, when I worked in audio, I've seen different sides of it, and I always felt like that I feel best with the final touch, because I was a music journalist as well, and a DJ, and those elements are in the end. The DJ is the guy spinning the record or playing it on the radio or in the club, and the music journalist is the guy who's reviewing the record. So I always had one foot on the product that is out, one foot in. And also I had my own label, so I knew some of the things that are required to release the record and how to push it, distribute, and that stuff. So it just gives you an outside perspective, when you're the person who deals with the outside of it, not the actual production, but what comes out. Then your involvement is different, because you listen to it, you hear it, and you can apply that to how to work it inside. It's so I had the experience of distributing records and selling them, and to get the right packaging with the companies, and all that.
And so all that listening, you developed an ear for how you thought things should sound. Would that be right?
I think I can't say developed a ear for how it should sound, but more being open to the different aesthetics, and how you can take one thing and to put it in another. Like you can take one type of music and sound and alter the sound to fit a certain territory. Even with what's given, you can make the alterations.
Yep.
I think it's more of being open, knowing the aesthetics, understanding either the market or the potential market, it's a different thing. There is what is the market right now, and what is the potential market for a certain thing, and knowing that even if it's a niche market, it still has a crowd, and knowing how to cater that crowd. So
right.
It's a very generic thing, but when you take the whole picture of it and bring it into actual audio practice, then you can do a lot with that. You can actually take something that would sound outdated in a way, and you can turn it to vintage.
Yep.
Then it's not dated. Then it's like cool. So there's ways, if you know the delicate parts, how to move something from one, from what would be considered not the right market to the right market, and you can do that by changing tones.
Yep.
And also you got to always appreciate what is there for what it is. You've been given a classic record, classic rock record. You're not going to try to make it a modern record, because it doesn't fit. You got to keep it as a classic. So
Sure.
Also you got to keep the legacy of what it is. And I've seen people do the opposite, and sometimes it just doesn't work right.
Definitely.
You got to know what boundaries are, and you can break some of them too.
Yeah.
So that's what gravitated me to mastering, being the outside person who can bring a fresh and objective feedback to something, and also bring a new perspective to it.
Yeah. So once you had the interest in mastering, did it take you a long time to practice it, to be developing those skills before you felt like you were getting good results, or do you feel like you got it fairly naturally and quickly, or Was it a long learning curve for you to get to the point where you're like, I've got this now. I can do it and put myself out there. How
I
was that
think
for you?
I think in audio it's like in life. You keep learning and you keep working your skills.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you have one formula, I don't have one formula. The reason you see I have different gears because I have different tastes for different things, and not everything could work with the same thing unless I want to impose that sound. But I try to go with what the recording is and what the music dictates, and the same thing applies to how I approach. Every day is a learning and a skill day. Yesterday you work on something, you brought it to a certain place. The next day you're doing it differently, you bring it to a different place. And sometimes the clients are totally happy with what you give them immediately, and sometimes they need to make some changes. And that's fine because you want to cater their vision of how it should sound. So,
Yep.
So even when I've done records in the beginning, it's not like I said to myself, now I'm ready. Just you dive in, you fix, you improve. It's whole, experience that you go through and you learn, relearn, change, reach, and then you reach out to something you haven't done before, and then you try it and maybe it doesn't work, and then you go again to it next time and maybe it does work. It's not something that you get to a point and now you say, okay, that's it. I think you can feel that you can do certain things. It doesn't mean it will be on everything. And also your clients have their own tastes. You can do the best thing and they will not like it, or they would like something else.
So do you have to deal with that sometimes when you know that you've done a really good job of something and you've done something that's appropriate for the aesthetic of the music, but the client wants to take it in another direction, which your experience tells you it's not necessarily musically right for it? Is that difficult to deal with? I know you'd always want the client to be happy with their product, but I think you know what I'm asking.
Well, first of all, if they tell me in a detailed way, or in a way that I can understand what they want, I'll try it.
Yep.
If it works, great. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But if I know it's not going to really work right, at least I'll try to understand a bit more from them to see, where it can work. Sometimes they'll want something and it doesn't work, but then you'll explain to them what you think is the problem, and maybe there's another possibility. And then you find what can work, kind of like what's in the middle. Right. Certain things just don't do good for the music, and you have to find a place where at least it works with them and it does sound right. But there are times where what they want is really bad, and if they want that, you just give them that. It's I guess every engineer that I know, at least, I think can tell you that there's some records that they're super proud of, some that are proud of, some that are okay with, some that are cool with, and some of that they're not so super happy, but at least they did the best they can with what they got and what they were requested to do.
Yeah, I guess hopefully the ones that you're the least happy with are the few and far between. I hope there would be not so many of those, I guess. Or
you never know what's going to be hitting and what will be successful. Sometimes a record that is not sounding the greatest that you've done can be good, and you get work from that too. And sometimes you'll be like, I could have done it better, but it did its job and it worked. So it's very hard to know. Also, you have to understand that a lot of times okay things can be successful. There's a lot of things out there that could have been way better, and they're not. But they became successful because they were good enough, and they had a fan base, and they got good marketing, good promotion, and they had good songs, or a combination of everything. So,
Yeah.
you strive to do the best you can, and hopefully that will help the record become better. But a lot of things are not in your control, and that's the funny thing about music. Sometimes bands that are really good don't get signed,
Yes.
and some bands that are not good they get, and then you have bands that were good not get signed, and then they got signed later on. So
yeah,
there's always this story about the guy who didn't want to sign the Beatles.
Yeah, and obviously also with recording, like nothing's ever completely ideal. There's always something that's like had to have been done at the last minute, or there's budget constraints or something. There's always limitations in every project, isn't there? That's just part of even the best case scenario. Is still going to have something that was not ideally 100% ideal. So isn't that true?
Right. In terms of budgets, the more you're in this business, the more you understand that a lot of times there is a budget. They just don't want to put the money in.
Right. Yep.
Like, if someone's really eager to do a good job, they'll put the money from their pocket, and, they won't go to a club for 2 months, and they won't go to, they won't buy, I don't know, drinks or something, and they'll save the money and they put it. I mean, it's part of the sacrifice,
That's a really good point.
Part of what I have here is because I really wanted to do what I'm doing. So I preferred investing in that than investing in other things. My business is important to me. It's my passion.
For sure.
And also, I have 2 kids.
Yep.
And the money that comes in from the business pays to run the business and for my family. And I don't live fancy or something like that. So,
look, that's you could run a whole podcast on that. The things that people frivolously blast tons of money on, the amount of actually cool stuff they could have bought if they, put it into, mastering gear or something, it's obscene. Yeah. So, on the subject of projects and albums and that type of thing, was there one in particular that a project that you got to master which sort of opened your career up further than it was before, that after that album, the phone just kept ringing? Was there such a time, or was your career, has it been like more like a steady arc, or was it one particular album?
It's never been a steady arc. It's always a roller coaster ride.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm happy that throughout my career I got to work with a lot of artists that I grew up listening to or knew of and had a lot of respect to. Each artist that you work with that is known can open more doors. Some of them open way more doors than others. It's very hard to predict what will bring you more work. There's certain records that you've done that brought you a lot, and there's others that you expect and they didn't bring as much.
Yeah, well, okay.
It's hard to know. I got to work when I came to LA. Some of my first clients were Yngwie Malmsteen and Rob Halford, his own band Halford, and I did also remasters for Fight. Then in time, I worked with Sepultura and Angra, and the Necromantics, and Dokken, and Yes, and Walter Trout, Eric Gales, Armored Saint, Starset, Faith No More, William Shatner, Fate's Warning. It's all in time, throughout the years, and each artist opens up something for you. Band like Yes, I've done four projects with them. One was a studio album, and then 3 double live CDs.
Yep.
So those, brought me a lot of prog work. they're a big band in Prague. I've done blues stuff, like Eric Gales or Walter Trout.
Mm.
That brought things in. Of course, Sepultura and Halford and Cynic. Those bands brought a lot of metal. Goatwhore, Mayhem.
I'm guessing they would have brought in more unsigned bands that are fans of those bands as well. Would that be right? Because they've like, well, we loved it the way you did this sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
An example like Faith No More brought a lot of work in because what I did was the comeback album. After 18 years, they released a new album.
Yeah.
And so they had a lot of fans and people waiting for that to come out. And it brought me a lot of good work as well. And then I remastered the first album, We Care a Lot.
Yep.
And that got a lot of press as well. So those things, help. And there's a lot of legacy bands I worked with that are like Meatloaf, or that's in the rock. But
so is that remastering you're talking about there?
No, Meatloaf. I did a full new album.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
Which was doing good on the British charts.
Cool.
And then I've done a lot of remasters, like for bands like Therion and Today's the Day and Pigface. And remastered some other old stuff. So, in time, you basically build up certain niches and clientele, and that opens up another line of other people that want to work with you. And also there's singles that you do. I've done like Lupe Fiasco, Pick Up the Phone was a single that I did. There was other, singles that are more pop oriented or rock oriented. So they all bring. There's not one that brings, And sometimes it's a really cool surprise. You work on a project that you don't even know that people know, and then you get called. Hey, we like that record that you've done. It's like, wow, you guys heard it? I didn't know that it went that far.
Yeah, I guess there's an audience for nearly everything somewhere. I mean, there's going to be,
as long as you have stuff out there and people can reach it, and if they can read credits there, if it's a physical copy, there's more chances there's a credit. Sometimes those are also forgotten or miswritten or whatever. But in online, a lot of them don't have, but some do. And if that, people reach that and they like it, you get a call. Did a band called the Common Kings, that's the name. Okay. They're like reggae pop, and they're very well known. They sound great. And so, I really enjoyed working on that. And the guy who mixed it, Bob Horn, is a great mixer.
Yep.
And so it was a fun project because I got great mixes to work with, and they're a good band. So, it's fun. And we did 2 records, and
awesome.
2 albums actually. Yeah.
Yep. So with the remaster of We Care a Lot, was that difficult to do, or was it like, did you feel like you enhanced or changed much, or what was it like doing that?
Well, that album was the first one. The song We Care a Lot appears on that album and the one after, called Introduce Yourself, which there it was already a major label release, so it was re-recorded. But in the first album, they were limited in what they could do back then, budget-wise and equipment-wise, and it was their beginning.
Because it was like late 80s, I think, was it? That
it was mid-80s, actually.
Mid-80s. You're right. Yeah.
And they found the original tapes. So they digitized them, and they sent me the actual mixes. And, the vibe I went for was try to replicate what's there in terms of not ruining it, but what I can bring in that wasn't enhanced then, like low end, and the beef of it, the body. Um, a lot of times when you remaster stuff that is from the original tapes back then, there were different standards in terms of what people were listening to, if it was more scooped or not scooped, or, there were tastes. And
sure.
also you were limited to certain pieces of gear. And if you would master it in a certain studio, that's what they had,
Yeah.
Now we have abilities to capture way better, better equipment. Even the smaller studios today have better equipment than the studios then, So it was something for me as a challenge to give the respect to the songs how they are, but bring in what was missing then, which a lot of it has to do more with the beef, the body of the music and the low end.
Yeah.
And it came out good. It translates really well. I got a lot of people getting in touch with me and telling me they really liked it. And with the We Care a Lot, it's called the Deluxe Band Edition. So it's not just We Care a Lot. It has the name Deluxe Band Edition there. And that means it has bonus tracks too. And some of those tracks were remixed.
Right.
From the stage.
Like studio tracks, were they?
Yeah, they were remixed again by Matt Wallace, and there's also some live tracks, and there's demo tracks that were remixed. So it was a whole package of a bunch of stuff, and I think it came out really, really good.
Cool.
And it's surprisingly good. Like the music there is actually really good.
Awesome. Yeah, I haven't heard it, but I really look forward to hearing it. Actually, and I haven't bought a copy of the new Faith No More album, but I'm pretty keen to check them out now, particularly the remaster. Yeah, of We Care a Lot. I'm looking forward to checking it out.
Well, the new one is called Soul Invictus.
Yep,
it's already 2 years old, but
all my friends are mad Faith No More fans, and I've heard it plenty of times, but I've never, it's been playing in the background sort of thing. I haven't actually listened to it on a good system and checked it out, or even in the car, which obviously we all are familiar with what's going on with the car, even if it's not ideal. So, but yeah. Anyway,
it's a good record. It's very theme-wise record.
Soul Invictus.
Soul Invictus. It's very different than any Faith No More album.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But it's very dark. It's very like a movie feel. Every song is very different, but they all work together like it's a movie, and there's different scenes in it. And it was very interesting to work on.
I was going to say that would make it interesting to do the mastering for, wouldn't it?
Yes. Besides the fact that it's a legacy band and they're great, it was also very interesting and challenging because you want to keep all these songs that sound different to make them feel cohesive.
Who mixed that album?
Matt Wallace and Billy Good. Billy Good, he was the producer.
Right.
And he and Matt Wallace mixed it together.
Yeah. Cool. Now, I remember hearing in an interview that you were saying sometimes that you take something that people might think is like a flaw or something in a recording, and you somehow use that to turn it into the character of the master. I'm not really explaining that well, but I think you know what I'm talking about. That's one of your mastering tricks that you do. So can you explain what that's all about?
Well, sometimes what happens is you're cleaning up or changing or fixing a problem, and that creates a different problem. And it's better to keep the problem and work with it. But this is in some cases, not every case. And then at least it feels together. It feels with the music. Some problems are musical problems. They're actually not too bad if you keep them in the context. And if you clean them up, then you're creating other problems that come up. And
Are you mostly talking about sort of stray frequencies or build-ups of frequencies in an area? Is it frequency stuff more than anything?
Well, it could be a combination of frequencies. It could be certain dynamics that happen. This is not a rule of thumb to work with, but I was yesterday visiting a producer, and we were talking about the work we do together, and I told him, I don't have really tricks. I don't have really like special tricks. I listen to the music. First of all, I'll play the music. Every second of music is a timestamp of an activity, and you listen through it and you feel it. Now, there's things that are in the music that need to come out, and when you start fixing problems too much, it could maybe make it sound cleaner, but it can sterilize it too much. Or it could make it feel too produced now, but it's not too produced, it's just like too clean. Or it can make it feel too hi-fi when you want to go lo-fi. Or you know what I mean? It's not just about the cleanup. It's not just about fixing those frequencies, because sometimes those frequency problems are the character of it. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean you got to distort your recordings. I mean, that it could work. Sometimes it sounds right, but what it just means is that if I hear problems I can't fix and there are still problems, I'll call the engineer and say, hey, did you notice this or that? And if you can, tweak it so I can fix it. But sometimes I'll just say, no, I can fix it, or why don't we leave it that way and focus on other things surrounding it. And that's kind of, I've had mixes come in with hiss, and, cleaning that hiss did more, not damage, but clogging to it. You clean it up and it sounds nice, but I actually like that hiss. It kind of felt right with it, so I didn't clean that up. And in a way, it actually sounded better that way. It sounded like there's an opening. I don't focus on forensic audio. I'm not the guy who cleans up stuff and cleans, because it's better to do that while you're mixing. If you have issues, clean them up there, because then you don't need to chop or apply things to it that will change the sound. I think it's better to do that either after recording, like cleaning up the pops and all that, and if you can't in the recording, then at least in the mix prep or in the mixing. It can be done in mastering. I think that a lot of times when you start focusing on the forensics, you start losing the musicality. And a lot of times you get a vibe, and when you start digging to fix something, it's kind of lose it in a way.
Yep, and I think it's
I can speak for myself.
For sure. But I mean, I've heard plenty of mastering where someone obviously has like a process where they just go through the process of cleaning things and making sure they're bright enough, to their idea and that sort of thing. And it has worked against the music, definitely. I mean, we've all heard, or whether it's final mixes where someone's thought that's what they needed to do. You hear when something's working against the actual music. So is there something that you hear coming in reasonably commonly, either from the maybe not from the higher end mixes, but is there something you consistently hear with mixes that is working against the musicality that everyone's doing, and you're like, oh, can you just send it back without this? Or is there something like that you hear all the time?
Yeah, there's quite a few things. I don't want to start naming things because it's going to kind of become a debate that there's no point in the debate. But what I can say is this.
Yep.
A lot of times people are obsessed with their overall tone of the mix. And because they're so obsessed with that, what happens is the music just loses its life. There's a point where the tone works against the music. So it just because it has a curve that the ear likes,
yep,
you have to listen beyond that ear candy curve. Listen to how the instruments and the vocals come out. There's times where I get mixes that it just sounds too processed or over processed in the way that the music just not doesn't pop out.
Yeah.
And the first thing I do, like, I'll try to work it out as is because that's what they sent me. But if I find I'm fighting it and it's impossible to really get the music moving, I'll call the engineer. Sometimes I'll ask him, do you by any chance have this, or this on your master bus? Most cases they say yes. And I say, look, how about this? Can you try a print without this and that? Again, I'm not naming names right now, what it is, and then they give me a call an hour later and they're like, wow, mix sounds way better. Why is that? And then I explain them, why, what happened to, and it's surprisingly funny how we have all this technology in our hands and we have all this ability to work with music and manipulate it.
Yep.
So we'll jump on certain things because we think we like it, but we'll overlook the whole musicality of it just because we like the feel of what it did on, the curve that it did for us. And because they're into the mix all the time and working it, that they stop noticing it. And I can, and for me, I never heard it before, so I play it, and so immediately I'm seeing that it's stuck somewhere. Then I try to undo it or try to add to it and see what works.
Yeah.
And it doesn't. And once they take it off, either one or two or three, the elements that they apply there, and I'm not talking about compression. That's totally fine. I'm all about, if you have bus compression and it sounds right, keep your bus compression. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. Yep.
So there are other processes that can happen to just take the life out of it, and now some engineers, you'll tell them that they'll be like, this is how I did it. If I take that off, I have to readjust. And I'll tell them, okay, if you want to readjust, great, do it. If you don't, okay, I'll work with it as is, I'll deal with it, and some of them will take it off and readjust and it will work great. And some of them won't be interested because they're on another project or, they just like how they're mixed. And I'm like, okay, I'll work with it as is. I know how it could be without it because you start to learn that stamp that it does or the signature of it. So, I think that, and again, the reason I'm not naming names is because there's a few different ones out there, but in the end of the day, you have to remember the master bus is the most sensitive part of the mix because it takes everything.
Yep.
Influences it. If you put these processes on instruments or groups, then they will have less effect on the whole song. They have the effect on the specific instruments or buses groups that you apply on.
Yeah, and if you go as heavy-handed on a processor on the master bus as you do on an individual channel, it's like putting 20 teaspoons of sugar where you only needed one on something else, or you know what I'm saying. It's like you have to be much lighter-handed if you're going to do it as a general principle, yeah.
But everybody makes differently, and or everybody has a way they like to work, like their friends, or when they look after and see and learn. But you have to remember that even if somebody does it, they probably if they're really good at it, they probably found a way how to make it work right. Just because somebody's using a certain thing and they're really successful at it and they sound great doesn't mean you can apply the same thing and it will make it work the same. So, some engineers I get mixes from and they apply that stuff, but it works for them. They know how to apply it in a way that you don't feel it's heavy-handed or you don't feel that the musicality got flattened.
Okay. Yeah.
But there are people who they saw and they learned or they got tips and they start doing it. Or either read online or somebody gave them a tip, try this, try that, and they did too much of it, and it just took the life out. And
that's
it's out there. You know, I'm sure if the cost of plugins was exactly as hardware gear, people wouldn't be putting as much plugins on their master bus.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that.
But that being said, what I'm said applies to certain mixes that come in. It's not a rule of thumb. And if what you do sounds good with it and it works, it works. If it can work without it better, you can try and see. Sometimes it's worth auditioning, seeing how it's without, even if it needs adjustment. You know, it might need a few tweaks, but it might sound better. But it's worth experimenting and seeing what works. I do that all the time with the gear. Like, I hook up different chains and I see which chain really sounds good to me, or just I like because it changes something. So I'm not just falling for, oh, there's a change, I got to do that. No, maybe the change is not that great.
Yeah, I can see that's something that's going on that people need to rethink, is having a go-to chain, or having, I always process this in this way, that type of, instead of listening and hearing what's required. And that's an easy trap to fall into, I think, especially when people are starting out. They're excited about plugins and, and they're trying to learn. So someone else says, oh yeah, you use this, all these things. And then, but yeah, it needs to come back to listening in the end, I think,
And you don't have to impose something. If it doesn't work with that, then you don't have to impose it. I'll try different scenarios, different chains, and see what works for me. And sometimes something that really sounds cool doesn't fit. It sounds cool, but it just ruins it. And then sometimes the opposite, something that sounds really not that great, actually is the perfect fit.
Yeah, right. And it's having the experience and the, I guess, conviction to know when that is, and rolling with it, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot about integrity with yourself, because you can tell yourself you have a tone. You can tell yourself, this is what my clients like. You can tell yourself, this is the true way to do it. This is what I like. You can say all of that and it will work. But you can also ask yourself, does it really work? Or am I doing that because the last project the client liked? And I want to keep that consistency. I always ask myself what works, like if it does or not. I'm not just running through a certain piece of gear because the 4 projects before were all working with it great. I really try to listen to the music and see what fits, and not put that imprint of something just because it worked before. There are certain things that work in general. Yes, there are. Especially, throughout your career, you experience certain things that work for you. Okay, there is, and it maybe becomes part of your signature sound. That can happen as well. But there's also a point where you can be more flexible to trying things and seeing, if you move that direction, does it help or not? There's certain things I will stay for a long time with that I love, and certain things I will change. But in general, the picture has to be what you can give to it, and be honest with yourself. Does it sound better with that or not?
Yep, for sure. So sometimes when do you work much with, do bands send you a mix and you give them some feedback, and do you have that like a working relationship with bands in that way sometimes, or are you open to that kind of thing? Or?
I know I always leave them the option to do that if they want. Some bands contact me prior the mastering session, send me a mix. I'll tell them what I think, and then they apply that and fix. Sometimes I get a mix that has a problem. I'll tell them what to fix, and they'll fix, and we'll go back and forth. Open to the communication, and for me, it's a team effort. So it's not just, okay, I got it, I do it, that's all. I finish, work, I send it. I'm open to changes, revisions, suggestions, whatever we need to do to make it work. Sometimes it works immediately. Sometimes you got to massage it a bit, tweak here, tweak there. I'm always open to communicating. Sometimes I talk with the bands and I ask them what they don't want as well, because
right.
it's certain times, you get somebody approaching you and they said, we weren't happy with this, or we were not happy with something in the mix, or we want to go a different direction. So I ask them, what didn't work before, what you don't like. Those things can affect a lot the results.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that it's more, you take it from that angle as well as just like telling people how to mix, or what would improve their mixes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's better to know what you don't like. If I take you now to an Italian restaurant, you don't like pasta. Okay, so I won't suggest pasta. Or if I take you to a restaurant and I don't know that you don't want to eat like you don't want to eat a salad, it's good to know that up front. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Not every time the bands know it. Sometimes they're not sure about that, or they don't even have, they didn't even think of that, and that's okay. It's usually the situations where they're not happy with something, either in the mix, or they were somewhere else, or they're not happy with something they've done years ago, and they don't want to repeat that situation.
Yeah. So I think I probably know what you're going to say, but despite the fact that you've got so much awesome analog gear, do you sometimes not even hit analog, just totally a digital master?
Well, I have a lot of digital hardware gear too.
Yeah.
Not everything is just analog and digital. There's, to me, there's three things. There's analog, digital, and plugins that are digital, of course.
Yeah.
Plugins are digital, but there's digital hardware, which sounds different than plugins. And
for sure,
it's a different concept, because with digital hardware, you have other things that can come into the picture. This also in analog that happens too, because in analog you also have the digital side that converts the analog. And there's also plugins, and each one has its own thing. I've done projects that were all digital hardware, and I've done some projects that were digital in the box. Yes. I don't have one saying that says this is good, this is bad. They're all good and they're all bad. It's just analog can also not sound as great on certain things, and digital hardware has its thing, and plugins have their thing. So it's usually what fits. Usually the way I like to work is I work with the gear, and then if I need to tweak, I can tweak later on, or tweak either on the desk or later on if needed.
Yep.
Plugins have come a long way from when I first tried plugins. I think it was in the 90s, end of the mid late 90s. It's when I first experimented with plugins, and they had definitely had.
Oh man, they've definitely come a long way from that era for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of them sound good. I personally like working with gear a lot. It's very intuitive for me.
Yep.
The knobs. I also like the sound. To me, it doesn't matter if something is emulating the real thing or not. It's how does it sound, if I like it or not. Some plugs don't emulate great, but they sound good at what they're doing, so why not?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Some plugs emulate really well, but if it doesn't fit, there's no use to it for that project. So to me, I don't fall for how good the emulation is or not. If it sounds good, I'll work with it, And there's some old plugins that still sound awesome, and they're part of a big history of the past 20 years.
Yep.
And so I don't mind using them too. and
Which
but
ones? Which ones?
my which ones are what the
Which ones are the ones that have been around for ages that still have something you like or might use plugins wise?
there's a bunch. Well, L2 is a good example.
Mm-hmm. I can see you've got the L2
I
hardware
guess.
unit behind you as well.
Yeah. Well, the L2 and the L1, they're a good example. Um, there's a lot of like less known plugins that were done years ago and they still work. There's some old DAWs that still, as long as you're working on old OSs, they still work.
Hmm.
But yeah, there's a bunch of stuff. I mean, I gave an example L2 and L1 because those are probably some of the oldest limiters out there in terms of plugins.
Yep.
And if you think of it, there's so many records out there that use those. It's like it's a legacy. It's like, wow, a lot of them. So yeah, there's some good stuff out there. It's just I personally like working with the gear, and some of the gear here was modified and customized for my tastes. Some of it was built for me. Some of it was just changed for me. And there is some custom boxes that I also own. Some of them I worked on. So I like to keep it interesting here, for me at least.
For sure. Does that include when you've, especially with your analog gear, have you ever experimented, like when you've had, I mean, obviously you would have done it on your mixers as well, but of just running the signal through these things and then bypassing, like without doing processing per se, just listening to what the boxes add just by running signal through them?
Oh yeah, lots of times. Some of my gear here, that's what I do with it. Like I'll just run through it.
Without actually processing, so to speak.
Well, it is processing. It's just without
turning the knobs.
Need, Yeah, of course. Yeah, some of the records I've done, that's exactly what was going through there. Yeah, there's gear here that, I just run it. There's no knob is moved. It's just running through it. Yeah, I love it. If it sounds right, yeah, you'd be surprised. There's gear that just running through. It's not improving. It's just fitting the sound, but it does something.
Changes the texture or something, I guess.
Yes. Texture could be a good word, but I would say it's just the layering of it. It gives a certain layer.
Right.
Embracing. It embraces the sound in a certain way, and I like that very much. And that's one of the things I do is I try to find what does that really, really nicely. And if you find the right thing, then you don't need to EQ as much because you already put the nice cover on it.
Right. So that's doing some of the work for you. Yeah.
Yes.
But you've got to know which one's right. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you have to experiment. One of the boxes I have is a box that's a custom box for me, and it does that as well. It fits a lot of projects, not every, but it fits a lot. And I have some of the boxes that you just run through. Some of them are tubes, some of them are solid state, but they have a tone to them. And right. Some records are really because like running through that box helped it a lot. Yeah.
And that whole thing is something you only get by running it through analog boxes. Is that right?
I wouldn't call it like that. I would say, it can also happen in a digital box if it has a sound to it, but
not with a plugin.
You can do that with a plugin. I just don't know which plugin does that. You know what I mean? Of course, if you take a Pultic plugin and you don't apply any of the EQ, just running through it will do a sound. It will give something. Because it's emulating a Pultic. Or if you're emulating a Fairchild, if you're emulating any gear you're emulating and you're not applying too much process, it's still processing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can get that. I just like getting that in analog, because I can just addition the different ones and see which one I like best. And there is things in analog that you can replicate in digital, but it would require more work to get there. Certain things you just pop in analog. It's like, oh, this is what I want. Where in plugins, you might be like, this is close, and I need to add more.
Right. Wow.
So it can happen, but in some analog emulations, you can do that. They have maybe a switch or a knob that pushes that more. And basically, you can do that with every piece of gear. It just not always it's going to be the same. And also, another thing to take in consideration when you're working with analog is it's not just a specific piece of gear. Like, it's not just the compressor or the EQ. It's the cables. It's the clocking. It's your converters. It's your power as well. I'm talking about conditioning, the balancing, the regulating, the cabling, all that. And then then the audio interconnect, the type of cable connector.
It all makes a difference.
Yeah, which clocking you're using. It doesn't mean that it has to be the best clock or the worst clock, but the clocking itself will affect the sound. And then the conversion, specific A to D, a specific D to A, each one is different. Sometimes they complement each other. Sometimes you add a different one to the picture because it complements better. So when you're dealing with analog and even hardware digital, you're dealing with more parameters and variants that come into the picture because of all the gear surrounding it. Where in plugins, it's not that case. The surrounding doesn't affect the plugin.
So does that mean you audition different sets of converters as well? Yeah.
I have a few, and I audition. I audition different DAs and different ADs, and I see what works better. Yeah.
Wow.
And I have clocks too.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And with cables, I test a bunch of cables all the time.
And cables. Oh my God.
Well, but that's for that. I'll test and I'll see what I like best, and then I work with that.
Yeah. So, you don't try out 5 different cables for one song or something like.
Well, you can, and some people will go that extra mile, and that's fine. What I do every once in a while is I'll try a set of cables, and if I like them, I'll move to those cables.
Right.
But that's not every day. That takes a long time because you've got to get used to the cable, and you don't want to fall for just, there's a change. You want to make sure that the change was the change you wanted.
Yep. Yeah.
So that is applied too. But I'll audition certain projects. I'll go with a certain clock, certain project with a different type of clock or clock combination. You can also do that. And conversion, of course. Yeah. I have different converters, and I'll see what works best. Plus, you gravitate to certain converters you like the most, and you fit them with the music. So every little thing changes, even if it's 1%, 2%. They make a change, and they change your workflow in terms of how fast you get to the result you want.
Yep. And do you I don't know if you have tape machines there, or whether you ever bounce stuff off a tape? Do you? Or?
I don't have a tape machine here. I have a lot of analog gear, but no tape. And the reason for that was maintenance, room, and most of the stuff I work on, this amount of gear here, and I even have more than what you see here on the desk. I have side racks here with more stuff. So if I ever need to really go to different sounds, I have the ability. Tape is cool, but there's a lot of things to do with the tape in terms of maintenance and the amount of projects coming with tape are limited. Regarding putting it to tape and then bouncing back, there are benefits in it, but sometimes there's also not the benefits. It could also bring other stuff in. It really depends on the project. Maybe in the future, I don't know. I have thought of it a few times, but right now I prefer investing in a better transfer chain, better cables, better gear that I like more,
Sure.
adding colors. I have a lot of optional colors here. I want to add more so I can be more and more versatile all the time, and you know be able to cater the different tastes and apply it too in terms of I can give you this sound or whatever you want.
Yeah. So when you talk about colors, is that again, is colors, are colors something that you would ever get from using plugins, in your opinion?
Yeah, you can. I mean, a color is basically a shape, a curve, a vibe. You can get that from plugins. You can get it from, even if you change DAW, it's, certain things will change. Summing changes in different DAWs. The play, it can sound different. Even in the box, things can change. There's a lot of things you can change in the box to improve your sound or to give you certain colors. And it doesn't have to be just the plugins. It could be even a certain DAW you use can give you a different sound just because how the audio driver was designed.
Yeah, sure. So which one do you use, or which ones?
Well, I have a few. I use a combination because I don't work in the box in terms of the prints. I use Pro Tools to run as like a tape machine. Like basically, I use it to play the music, run through the disc, and come back. So the Pro Tools is a playback capture, and for singles and stuff like that, usually it's enough unless I need to do more processing later. Then I'll apply it in a different program. But I have quite a few DAWs, and each one has its own pros and cons. Some of them are really fast to use and easy. Some of them are more detailed and take more time. Mm-hmm. And some of them I use like really unique stuff that was old, and some of this is current. So basically, everything from Waveburner, Wavelab, Studio One, whatever you want. I got a lot of them here. Logic. I have a lot of them here. It's just whatever works. But I also have, I have the old stuff too, like Peak, which is a really old one.
Okay, I haven't even heard of that one.
They're old, and they have their good things for certain things, and I also have dedicated DDP players and creators, like the Sonorous DDP creator and player.
And that's for assembling the final, what do you call
DDP.
it? Yeah. And the transitions between the finished tracks and all that sort of thing.
That I do in a different DAW. Yeah, I change whatever is needed. It's you have tools and you just choose. Okay, this is one I need something that can work that way, and each one is different. Some stuff I really like to work fast on because I want to stay focused, and some stuff I can work on slower.
So you do use Wavelab sometimes?
Wavelab, Waveburner. Mm-hmm. I have also Peak from Bias. The last thing they did, the Peak Bias Peak XT, Bias Peak 6 XT Pro Master.
Oh man!
With all of its own stuff.
Crazy.
And I got a bunch of stuff here. Other stuff that. Other DAWs, I have dedicated sample rate converters. It's just, you got a bunch of them.
Crazy. That's interesting. I think you might be the first person that I've spoken to that's got like a real range of DAWs. I haven't really had that discussion very much, but I'm assuming most people, well, a lot of people that have spoken to about it sort of seem to have one favorite one. They don't have like a selection. So that's pretty interesting.
Well, it makes sense to have one and work with it all the time. I just have a few because certain things I like to open with certain DAWs. When I want to check certain things, I'll open a certain DAW because of the graphics of it. And, in the readings I can read. A different one is I'll use because I can really work fast the fades and work fast. Each one has its pros and cons.
Sure.
Some of them are really high quality and great to work with in terms of getting the results in terms of sonics, but they're slower to work on, and that can sometimes alter your decision making. Where some others are faster, might be less as fancy as the other one, but you can get stuff done quicker and focus on the sound. So I can say this: throughout time, you start to find what you like the best, and you work with that. But
definitely,
it's like I have a bunch of gear, and some things I'll pull in and put something else instead, and sometimes I'll go back. So it's not one size fits it all, but I wish there was one DAW that will be like everything you ever wanted. But it all has a price to it, and it's usually the price of it is you lose on the way.
I've spoken to some guys that reckon Pyramix is that.
Pyramix is a great DAW
because it's super versatile and that type of thing. But I think I found I don't know. It depends what you want to do with it. I think I like simplicity. Like when it comes down to it. But I'm not doing mastering, so I've always been in Pro Tools. I found Pro Tools to be really simplistic and fast. But it's so much of it's what you get used to. I think if you spent time learning something like Pyramix, it probably opens up much wider than what Pro Tools does, But again, it depends what you're doing with it as well, I suppose.
I think DAW can go deep if you want. You can go deep, or you can go medium, or on the surface. And Pyramix is a great one. There's another one called Sequoia, which is great.
Yep.
They're both PC based. There's also Sadie, which is also great. That is also PC based.
I remember Sadie. Yep.
In Mac, you don't have many of those for mastering, but in general, every DAW you work on, the more you know it, the better you can work with it and get the results.
Yeah, like tools in general, I suppose it is about how well you know the tools, isn't it?
So how well, and also how you like it. Some stuff well, but it's going to take you more time to work with. It really depends on preferences, and I'm open to changes. And if somebody comes in and say, hey, there's this new DAW, I'm not going to be the one saying, no, I don't care. Show me. It might be cool. I embrace the change.
Yep. Awesome.
I'm not the guy who says, oh, just that.
Yep. I think we can tell.
It just does so much. There's so much, and it's hard to grasp it all. There's so much things out there. There's so many plugins out there. There's so many hardware out there.
Yeah.
It's easy for me to get to grasp the hardware because it's less amount than the plugins.
Yeah. I was going to ask you before, when you finish doing a master and you sort of think, yeah, this is sounding awesome, do you ever throw up a reference master, like maybe it's an album you've already mastered before or something that's a classic one that you love the sound of? Do you ever throw something up and listen to it against what you've done? Or you don't do that?
No, I think it's not fair to do that. Every recording has its own thing. Every recording has its signature. When you try to apply that to something else, maybe trying to get to that reference will exaggerate certain frequencies that don't fit the original project. There's a difference between listening to something and in your mind it sounds close to something and you're like, oh, it reminds me of, than to actually trying to reference to that, because I think it just doesn't do justice. Every recording has its own clues, and you can take it to certain places, but I think it's dangerous to try to compare. A lot of times what I will do with a mixer or producer or band, that they'll send me their loud versions that the mixer did.
Yep.
So at least I know what they're used to, and then I'll just bring mine, but at least I know where the ballpark of their volume level that they're expecting. And I usually recommend to mixers, if you are making a loud version, be aware that as long as you give them a limited version, but it's not multi-band or saturate or stuff like that,
Yep.
then it's easier to compare that to your mix. But if you put a limiter that is a multi-band, or a compressor that is multi-band, or a saturator, or a multi-band saturator, transient saturate, whatever it is, it's going to affect how the mix is originally. So your mix notes that you get from the band don't apply exactly to the mix unless your multi-band was part of the mix or saturator was part of the mix. But it's better to give just a limited version that is loud enough, and then it will translate as your mix. And some plugins don't say that, but they are multi-band, or they are saturators or clippers, and it's inside, but you don't see it on the outside, so you don't know.
Yep,
so it's a good practice to know which plugins are the least curve changing, or altering the frequency and dynamics, and use that as to level up and to give to the bands. Now, sometimes you do get references from the bands, like, we want to sound like this. You try to see, you try to bring it that direction, but a lot of times it's not. But maybe there's a vibe there that you can go with, and maybe that helps. So I try to understand the vibe of the music and push it to that direction instead of frequency, one-on-one, because that, if your mix comes in and it's bright, and what you're referencing is bright, but yours is brighter, but in a different frequency, it's going to be hard to adjust that to get to that frequency. Maybe it's better to darken yours so it's not popping out even more brighter.
So you're saying you have to be careful if you're referencing, because it starts to become, we're trying to match it, and then we go to a place that's not helping the music, sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes your reference, you want to get there, but going there actually doesn't do that great for you.
Totally, that makes complete sense. And with the advent of everything becoming more virtual, or less physical, and streaming and all this kind of stuff, has that changed where you're ending up with your overall compression and limiting and stuff? Have you noticed a change?
For a lot of years, I did a lot of masters that were not as loud. And
for streaming?
No, I just did that for a long time. And
that was just how you presented your finished product?
Yeah, they were not like loud, like super, super loud. And that brought me in a lot of work. And maybe also took some work off. I don't know. But the funny thing is, you play that stuff I've done 10 years ago, and you don't feel the volume drop, because now there's normalization. So it worked in my favor anyway.
Totally.
And a lot of records I do are not super slammed. The Faith No More stuff I've done, it's not, I can get loud, but it doesn't mean I have to go loud in a way that, really damages. Of course, it's a subjective thing. Some can say, there's no dynamics here, well, of course, but that's what they wanted. I have to cater what they want, So, you're judging me, but you have to remember it's their record. They made the decision. They approved that. They wanted that. And I've made some really loud records in my career. Some of them are really, really loud.
Yeah.
But they actually brought me clients in. And I think that you try to bring your best, and then if the client wants louder, you can talk with them about it. If they still insist, then you give them that. If I saw a trend change or something, let's say this, people say today they don't want the loudest record in the world, but a lot of them still want it loud.
Yeah.
Competitively loud, and it's still loud. I try to give them something that feels right. I'm not looking for how do I make it as loud as that, as much as more like how do I make it sound good? where's the sweet
course, yeah.
spot in terms of level. When I get to that level, I give them that. And in some cases, they'll say, "Oh, can you add another dB or two?" And then I try to see what I can do. And if I can add another dB and it's not ruining it big time, then I'll do that. If it's ruining it big time, I'll tell them, "Look, I think it's going to ruin it, but here's the example. You wanted 1 more dB. This is 1 more dB." And in a lot of cases, they'll call me back and say, "Let's go with the 1 less."
Yeah.
In some cases, the 1 dB extra worked. But there's still a loudness war in a way that people are still trying to, they say they're looking for dynamics. They say they don't want the loudest thing, but they basically do still ask for that.
Yeah. Even for streaming?
Well, they can't check it because, it's in streaming once they upload it. But before streaming, they compare it to what they compare on their computer. If they play something that sounds louder on their phone, then that's how they judge it. Once all the devices in the world, computers, phones, cars, once all of that would be normalized, everything will be the same volume, we wouldn't have to fight that. Then it's an aesthetic, how much compression you want. Because today, a lot of people are used to the sound of things being slammed, not just for volume's sake, but some of them like that compression feel, that everything is like really tucked in, really super glued, really no movement. And it's an aesthetic, it's not saying it's bad or good, because some people like it and it drives them. Some people don't like to hear things move up and down. Some of them just like it to stay in one place. And it's an aesthetic, just like distortion in a guitar. It's an aesthetic, People like that sound, and it's generations that like this and like that. So it's not the compression problem, it's more the level. There's a lot of things that were super compressed in the 80s as well.
For sure.
But it sounded right. Or even in the 70s, they're compressed, but they sound right. It's just where we got with the volume level, which became fatiguing to listen to.
Yeah, do you end up doing, is it a different master for vinyl, CD, and streaming? Is it usually 3 different ones that you might end up doing, or how does that work for you?
I try to do one that can cater everything.
Right.
And then if there's certain needs, I'll do, like for the vinyl, or I'll print a different, thing in for video. Or I usually try to first of all aim for one that sounds right.
Okay. And
then that, if we need, I'll do another one. Because do one for this and one for that. But I start from one that I think can cater most. Then for the vinyl prep, I'll make a different print for that. And then if it's streaming or video, they need something else, we'll move with that. But my first initial run would be to cater it all, because I want them to have something they can relate to, and not this is for this is for that. Yeah, before that, first let's find what works.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Right, so it hasn't become that utopian thing that that like people have we haven't reached the world of everything's normalized and we can just go on aesthetics and that sort of thing. Hasn't quite got to that yet.
Not yet. I hope people will get into that, because a record lives for a long time when it has a combination of what makes it good. Volume is not what makes it good. Now, steps of compression, I can say, okay, I understand that, because that's an aesthetic thing. Yeah. Volume is not an aesthetic anymore, because to get volume, you have to degrade the quality.
Sure. Okay? Yeah.
Now, if let's say you degrade the quality because you like the sound of the degradation, then that becomes an aesthetic. So if it becomes really loud and really fuzzy and really slammed and really smashed and nothing is moving there, and it becomes a bit edgy, and then you lower the volume and it's still in the same volume as anything else out there, and you like the result, then that's the aesthetic. That's the artistic decision. And it didn't have to do anything with the volume. It has to do with the result of what you got when you went to that volume.
Yep.
And I'm okay with that because that's, again, an aesthetic. But the volume itself, when that's taken out of the equation, then the fight is not about the volume. The fight is about how the music translates and the aesthetics. And that's where you're competing. Yep. And if your aesthetics work there and people dig it, great. But you're not falling for the volume level.
And that's what'll give an album, hopefully, its longevity as well, I guess.
Well, the longevity is the combination of things, but combination of, songwriting, lyrics, arrangement, production, mixing, mastering, marketing, timing. There's a bunch of things that make that thing become what it is. But in the end of the day, when we don't have to fight the volume in terms of level, but we can still use volume as a tool to get to certain aesthetics if needed, if needed, I say, then at least when it's sitting out there with other things that came out, then it's not who's louder is winning the competition. It's what do you connect the most to. And even if it's super compressed, but it's the same volume, but you like that, then that's what makes it work for you.
Yep, absolutely.
It will take about, I guess it's going to take, 5 to 10 years till things start to be normalized more and more. I can't say exact amount of years, but the reason I'm saying 5 to 10, it's because you want to create everything that way, every service. And also, there's different standards of normalization. That takes time till things start to sit in the same place.
Yeah, sure.
And so, like everything that has a change, it takes about 5 to 10 years because there's regulations, there's understanding what people like. You work on something and then you find 2 years after, you find out that there's something better that they can have and then try to get that in.
Yep.
And why not listen to full resolution?
That's
you don't have just
totally,
to compress, lossy files or
oh,
lossy.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was nasty when it was down to 128 kilobits all the time. At least we've gotten away from that, gotten a bit of a distance away from that now. well,
you still hear on certain radio stations.
Yeah.
You can hear the the conversion. The way that it became lossy and sounds weird and harsh. But again, when we'll be in a point where everything is normalized, I think it will help a lot.
Most definitely. Yeah, I think you're definitely right. Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about loudness units. I'm just saying because they're going to change it in time and see what works best for them. Some hope.
But just a way that all the music can be judged on its merits and its aesthetics with loudness taken out of the equation. That's what you mean, isn't it?
Yeah. If the way to achieve a certain sound is to make it loud, to get fuzziness and edgy and compression, that's okay. But once everything is normalized, then then you get the gig or you get the praises based on his because people digged it. And not because it was louder than something else.
Yeah, and I suspect how much of that processing is needed to get that kind of a sound is probably less than what a lot of people assume it is or think it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think you can get the results with way lower volumes. Yeah. I still do records that are loud, and I do ones that are not loud, and I do records that are in between, and I do a lot of dynamic stuff as well.
Yeah.
Because I also even some metal stuff that I've done, I made it dynamic.
Yep.
Something is lower in level. Even some rock stuff, some of it is,
That's awesome because some it's because some mastering engineers do default to they set their weapons to stun right from the word go. You know what I mean? Whether it's appropriate or not. So they definitely, I know some of them definitely do because I think that's just it's the same as everything else that you've talked about, it's you can't assume anything is a default go-to process. It's got to be, well, it's a combination of things, but it's partly having the experience to know what suits the music or what's going to work, what is appropriate for the music and all that, isn't it?
Yeah. But it's also expectations. Certain people go to certain people because they have expectations to get that certain result.
Yeah.
And I can understand why, there's mastering engineers that work in a certain volume level, and that's what their clients want them to do. And that's totally fine because they're catering their clientele. And that's the most important thing in the service-based industry. So if that's what requested, by all means, do it. I don't look at them as bad. Every once in a while, there is something that comes out and maybe people didn't like or people like, but the producers didn't like, and those things happen. But in the end of the day, you cater your audience. If your audience wants it loud and that's what you're known for and that's what they come for you because of that, you got to give them that. Don't expect that. Mm-hmm. I don't have one set of what the target volume is. I'll just go with what sounds right to me. And if the client digs it, great. If they want me to make changes, I'll make. If they want me to go lower or higher, I'll work with them. But at least, you start learning that specific clients or, meet the expectations.
Sure.
What they give you.
Cool.
That's why it's good to send to a mastering engineer your mix for mastering, the unloud one, non-loud one, and then also the loud one. So at least he knows what you're expecting. And I've had times where I actually mastered it lower than what they gave me as the ref.
Yep.
And when they heard it, they understood why I did it lower, and it sounded bigger and easier on the ear. And I've had times where I made it louder than the ref.
Yep.
Or the same volume. But at least sounding better.
Yeah, awesome. Very, very interesting. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about your room and your monitoring as well, because it looks insane, and I'm sure your room is awesome. Was your room designed how far back to scratch was the actual room design and the acoustics and that type of thing? Was it entirely your specifications right from the start, or can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, this room was done twice. The first time I was totally unhappy with.
Right.
Yeah, it was really bad. And I was totally not happy with. The good thing is I had experience with working in bad rooms already in the past. So I could at least still work when it was first done. And then I flew in an acoustician from Israel by the name of Jonathan Sheffer. And in 10 days, he designed the room, tuned, shooting the room with frequencies and all that. And we had it built in 10 days.
So you had to rip out all the previous treatment and start from scratch?
Yeah.
Wow.
Ripping out the old stuff, starting from scratch. Every day, doing frequency analyzation, playing music, trying to see where to put the speakers. We're moving things around, trying different things. But it was intensive, very intense. 10 days of really a lot of tweaking and critical listening to get to the sound.
Yeah. Were you less involved with the initial setup, like the previous setup that you ripped out? Were you less involved with that being set up?
Yeah, I was less involved. The thing is that certain rooms, you can have the person design them, but it's at least good to be there to know. And in the first design, I was involved, but much less. I let them design before, and then I did what they asked and all that, and then they came in and so still in this case, I told the designer up front. I told them this is the things I'm expecting. This is what I have now. Prior to him coming here for 10 days, I'd taken pictures measurements. I did video chats with him. I showed him every angle I could in the video. I showed him, where things are in the room so he can make a 3D model prior to coming in. And then also I told him what types of music I'm expecting to listen to,
Yep.
and what are the obstacles that can happen, with that. And so he made a 3D model before, and he knew what to expect more. Then when he came here, he already knew the place in a way.
Yep.
So it was easier to establish a starting point. So it saved us a lot of time and work. So it's a month of pre-work, not every day. A month of phone calls, Skype chats, video chats, pictures, measurements. Where things are placed in the room. Then after that, when he came here, he already had a good idea of what's happening here. And then we played music and measured and we did the tones and all that and sweeps and all that, and saw where the desk is and what reflections to work on.
Yep.
Yeah, he was fast because we had the access to really good computing devices that helped us make the calculations.
Okay.
So
yeah. If you had to sum it up, what is the main difference between what it was and what it is now?
Sum it up. It's a room I can work in easily, and everybody who walks in this room and plays music, they can hear the details. They can notice things they didn't hear before, and they can feel comfortable with listening. And at the same time, it's critical enough for them to know what's inside, and it's easier to work that way. A good, well-designed room will make you work quicker and make better decisions. And like I said before, I've worked in bad rooms before. I've worked with different types of speakers. So I had experience with working in not the best ideal situations, but working in a really good environment, it makes it much more enjoyable, and it lets you really work and less deal with problems that you might not notice.
Yep.
And that exists.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's everything, isn't it? Having the confidence in your room. If you're doing mastering, you've really got to feel like you can trust what you're hearing and not be second guessing or all that.
Yeah, and it also makes your speakers work right. It's a bad room, your speakers are not going to be giving you the best.
Can you tell us about your monitoring as well a bit?
Yeah, I use PMC IB1S. Those are passive units driven by a Boston 4B SST square. That's hooked up to the Maslick MTC1X mastering console.
Yep.
Controls the volume. And I have a benchmark DAC that's feeding those.
Yep. And do you run
a Lynx Hilo and a Lynx Hilo as well?
Sorry?
And a Lynx Hilo also.
Yes. Okay. And so you don't need a sub with the big ones, those big speakers?
No, the room goes down to 20 hertz, and they go down to 25 hertz.
And is your room? That's awesome. That's amazing. But is the room? Would you say it's flat, or does it have a bit of a curve that you've liked the sound of to work in?
I can't say it's flat. I can say it's good enough for me to work with.
Yeah.
But it's to get a room sounding flat, sometimes actually it's harder to work with. There's pros and cons. You want the room to have the least amount of problems, rather going for flat, or going for a nice curve, a nice smooth curve. That's a different case. It's just like saying about a speaker that is flat or a microphone that is flat. A lot of them are not flat, but they have a decent curve. I can't say it's flat. But there's also to taste. Some of the stuff here, it's also how I like to listen to.
Of course, it doesn't. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be flat, does it? It needs to be what you get to know really, really well, isn't it? As well.
It's a good question. I think it needs to be representing of what can be taken outside.
Yeah, being that it's mastering.
Right, and that's the the best you can to make it fit that.
Yeah. So there's a little bit of leeway for a bit of non-flatness or whatever, like a bit of a musical vibe to it or something.
Yeah, and some rooms are more flatter than others, and they can also translate well. But it's dependent. I mean, each room has its own thing, and sometimes aiming for something like that can do good or could do less. Yeah.
And with your other monitors there, are they all just, do you use those to, they like all your B and C and D pairs for referencing your masters, or are they for?
Yeah, they're not used all the time. They're used if I feel I need to check something, then I use them. I use my PMC as the main that I work with, and then if I feel I need to change or check and I'm not sure, then I turn them on as second pair, third pair.
Yeah.
Like that.
Awesome, man. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and I thank you so much for your time and having a good, thorough chat about a whole bunch of stuff. It's really awesome, and I hope you've managed to enjoy having a chat as well.
Yeah, it was fun. Yeah, I had a good time. Thanks.
Awesome, man. All right. Well, I guess we'll sign off for this episode. And actually, I should probably say, have you got any projects coming up that you're that you're able to talk about? Anything cool coming up for 2018?
Yeah, well, yeah, some of them I just can't talk about.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But yeah, but there's really good stuff. Yeah. I'm excited for 2018. Yeah.
Well, that's wicked. Yeah. No, well, all the best for a wicked year mastering, and yeah, we'll catch you again sometime.
Awesome. I'll be happy to do it again. Sure.
Yep. All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you later.
See ya.
See ya.